Hi everyone, I'm Asha McManus, Director of Marketing at Affectiva. Welcome to Affectiva Asks, a human-centric AI podcast where each episode we will interview a thought leader doing cutting-edge work in the AI space. A little bit about us. Affectiva is the pioneer of in-cabin sensing AI, software that can detect nuanced human emotions, complex cognitive states, behaviors, activities, and interactions within next-generation vehicles. Today's episode features Affectiva CEO Dr. Rana el Kaliouby interviewing Yashar Behzadi, CEO at Synthesis AI. To give a little context, Affectiva's AI is built using data-hungry deep learning models. Data synthesis is all about getting more data faster, and synthetic data is artificially created data that we can use to train our models. And because acquiring diverse data at scale for these models is time-consuming and expensive, synthetic data can give any AI company a competitive edge. So, Affectiva has partnered with Synthesis AI, a data generation platform for computer vision. In this live stream discussion, Rana and Yashar discuss the importance of synthetic data, some of its applications today, challenges, and the ethics surrounding its use. Let's listen in to learn more.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this live stream. This is Rana el Kaliouby, Affectiva's co-founder and CEO. As you know, we are on a mission to humanize technology. Very excited to be here today. The topic is going to be data synthesis and the role this plays in AI and machine learning. But before we dive in, I hope you're all doing really well. I'm especially excited today because I just got the first dose of my vaccine. I've never been so excited about having a boo-boo in my arm, but we're very fortunate here in Massachusetts in that there's been acceleration of the vaccines being available to everybody. And is it the same with you, Yashar, as well?
Yeah, I'm based in the Bay Area. So hi, everybody. Yashar here. Yeah, so they've started opening it up a couple of weeks ago. So fortunate to hopefully come slowly back to normal.
Yeah, exactly. I think spring is here and there's hope. So I hope everybody is still staying safe and well and connected. Alrighty, so Affectiva's AI is built using very data-hungry machine learning and deep learning models. And if you're in the space, you will know that acquiring diverse data is, of course, super important and super key. But doing it at scale is quite time-consuming and expensive. So data synthesis is a relatively new approach, which is about getting more data, getting it faster, and getting it more cost effectively by essentially creating synthetic data, artificial data that is used to train and also validate these machine learning models. By turning data synthesis into a core, capability, I think that gives AI companies a competitive edge. So at Affectiva, we've been investing in data synthesis as an approach over the past couple of years. We do some of it internally, but we've also partnered with awesome companies like Synthesis.ai to bring some of that capabilities into our machine learning pipeline, if you like. So Synthesis.ai is a data generation platform for computer vision. We've been working together, I'd say, almost a year now, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And you've helped us create images that we use. We're going to dive into, obviously, what exactly our collaboration is about. But we are very grateful for this collaboration. And I'm excited to have you with us today to tell us a little bit more about Synthesis.ai and how you think about this whole data synthesis world. But first of all, you guys just announced really exciting news yesterday. So tell us more about it.
Well, first of all, thank you, Rana, for having me. I'm really excited to kind of talk about what we're doing together. I think it's not often when you're an early stage company, you find another company to work with that shares the same values and the ethics and that are kind of building toward a mission that I think is more than just cost-effective data, but it's making sure that we're doing that in an inclusive way and reducing bias in a privacy-specific way. So it's been great to work with you on that regard. So I appreciate that. So yesterday we announced the launch of our Face API product. So it's a on-demand generation platform. We have an API to generate facial data with a diverse set of characteristics. It could be used for a number of different application areas. And also we announced our financing. So we raised some seed financing, some from great investors. Which was exciting. And I think we were also, lucky enough with these investors that they look beyond just the financial returns and really kind of align their mission and their ethics with kind of the things that we're doing and kind of how that could potentially impact AI from years to come. So really lucky to have them as supporters, really lucky to have you supporters. And excited.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we're definitely going to dive into kind of the whole fundraising experience and doing that during COVID and all of that. But before we dive in, I always like to start these conversations by getting a sense of who you are and your journey. Like, how, tell us a little bit about your background and how did you end up starting Synthesis.ai?
Sure. Yeah. So I have a technical background. So I have a PhD from UC San Diego, focused on my thesis was focused on fMRI and spatial temporal modeling. So kind of a bioengineering background with a mix of data science. I spent after that a number of years building DARPA-based systems for DARPA, kind of advanced sensor systems, and then stepped into digital health. So I was joined one of the early digital health companies, a company called Proteus Digital Health. We created ingestible sensors embedded in medicines and worked with global pharmaceutical companies to create a new paradigm for medicines. And then I started doing early stage startups here in the Valley. Prior to Synthesis, I was running an AI services company. So we're building computer vision models for some of the world's biggest technology companies. And some of the things you brought up were just very, very clear. So regardless of how big these companies were, they always had small data problems. New sensor, right? New feature, new demographic, kind of new geography that they want to operate in. Data was never sufficient. And I think more fundamental, and we'll get into this, I think, as we walk through this conversation, I think more fundamental than, having access to data was being able to provide labels that would support the development of new models, right? So as we kind of looked at these roadmaps, people wanted to have, depth information, surface normals, really complex information around material properties and interactions between objects and agents in a scene. Very difficult, if not impossible, for humans to annotate. So it led itself to thinking outside the box on other approaches. And that led to Synthesis, where we borrow from the decades of innovation from the visual effects and CGI industry and couple that with the latest, the greatest from the generative AI space to programmatically create just photorealistic, perfectly labeled data sets to train machine learning systems.
That is fascinating. And before I kind of ask deeper questions related to that, tell us a little bit about the company. How long ago did you start it? How big are you?
Great. Yeah, so we're still relatively early and still relatively young, but I think we have a great team that we've assembled. There's 11 folks in the team. We're about a year into kind of building out our systems, and it's an interesting mix of folks. People from the kind of CG visual effects industry who've built feature characters for feature films with leading edge AI researchers. I should plug that we recently wrote a book on synthetic data. It should come out this summer. So our team has literally written the book on the topic. So that's been fun. And I think we're on a mission, as we kind of talked about, to change the paradigm for computer vision and kind of provide these tools for as many folks as possible.
That's very exciting. So, for some of our audience members who are not really familiar with synthetic data, can you explain what does it look like and how do you generate it?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so under the hood, it's a combination of technologies, right? As I mentioned, we kind of borrow heavily from just the decades of innovation on the CGI visual effects front. We all have seen Hollywood movies and understand how good the quality of those tools and those approaches can be. We kind of amplify those using generative AI approaches to create broader sets of assets and kind of allow us to procedurally create just vast amounts of data. And we surface all that through a simple API for endpoint users, right? So our Face API will kind of take you through kind of what that, kind of how we formulated that and kind of what it's used for, maybe as a specific endpoint. So we have a simple interface. You can go on the website today, log in, set up an account, and start generating data on demand. So through the API, you can specify the distributions of data that you're interested in. So I need equal distribution across gender, ethnicity, age, BMI. You have to create a kind of comprehensive set. Then each of those identities can be modified in various ways: emotion, gaze, hair, accessories, and then the environment, the camera angles, all very simply through an API platform. And then that generates massive amounts of high quality photorealistic image data, all with accompanying labels. Now, one of the key things about synthetic data is that since you're generating the images, you have knowledge of the 3D scene and its components. You know a lot of information. You have pixel perfect information that you can provide to users. So everything from depth math, surface normals, material properties, right, interaction points between objects and agents in the scene, all for free during the generation process. So it really changes that. And I think, as we'll kind of talk about a little bit as well, I think the real, paradigm shift with synthetic data is this ability to iterate, right? When you look at how systems are built today and kind of computer vision is you build a complex hardware system called a car.
Right.
You drive around for millions of miles for months and months. You then have humans annotate that data and you then train a model. And at the end of that process, you say, what can my model do? Right. By analogy, this is kind of like how the Wright brothers operated, right? They build something, get on a dune and jump off and see how far you fly, right? But now obviously we have simulation and tools and design tools in every other engineering discipline except for AI, right? So that's starting to come forward, right? So it changes this, it gives you this ability to proactively prototype systems, understand system level trade-offs, and we'll talk about that, how we did that specifically with your team. But it allows you to iterate on a daily basis, generate some data, train a model, generate some more data in the loop, and kind of really optimize your model performance.
Yeah. So let's dive into how we've partnered together. So basically, like one of the areas that Affectiva is very focused on is in cabin sensing for car companies, right? And our vision there is to be able to track drivers and other occupants within the vehicle, understand their emotional, their cognitive state, their activities, what objects they're interacting with, and be able to personalize the mobility experience. So before you guys came along, before we kind of had data synthesis on our radar, our de facto approach to getting data was essentially to, we have 2 data labs in Boston, but also around the world, where we bring people in and we have them drive a car around, and we have camera sensors, instrumented in the vehicle. And we ask them to, they're driving around, so we try to simulate certain situations, right? Like pretend that you're angry, or we kind of maybe elicit anger responses or frustration, right? Or have them wear glasses or sunglasses or baseball caps. And of course, we want to make sure that these drivers and occupants are as diverse as possible. So this ends up being super time intensive, right? Because you have to bring these people in and obviously pay them. And then to your point, you collect all this data, then you ship it off to our data annotation team in Cairo and other areas of the world. They annotate the data, then we split it into training and validation, look at the results, and they're like, oops, we kind of need more people with sunglasses. And so you go back and collect more data, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
With you guys, we're able to say, here's a breakdown of the types of, gender, ethnicity breakdowns, age breakdowns, baseball caps, sunglasses. We need people who are awake, but also extremely drowsy. And we kind of basically tasked you with creating new data for us. So tell us more about the data you created and how did you go about this?
Yeah, no, I think your use case is super interesting, and it highlights a number of limitations of the current approach, as you kind of nicely outlined, right? You don't always know which kind of data you need, and it's obviously very hard when you look at the combinatorics of everything you want to capture across every person to capture that. And then oftentimes you learn many months later that you need different types of data, or even more fundamentally, maybe you put the camera in the wrong place, or maybe the imaging sensor needs to change. We've got to do it all over again, right? So it is a very slow process, and that's kind of how computer vision has been bootstrapped to date to kind of get to where it is. So for our kind of engagement, I think your team had a really clear idea of the kind of questions they wanted to answer with the data, which made it very easy for us to kind of come back and say, okay, let's think of the generation process and what would make sense, right? So just for the audience here, what we initially did is let's answer the question of where should we put the camera, right? And what kind of modalities should we leverage for the imaging, right? And then by being able to create thousands of individuals in an in-cabin environment.
These are new, and they're not real human beings. These are
not real, fully synthetic 3D kind of agents, but with high resolution, high fidelity kind of photoreal. Putting them in the cabin, having them go through a variety of poses and gazes, and being able to modify things like lighting conditions, and then putting the cameras in various locations as well. We were able to do system level trade-off studies on what makes the most sense, right, in terms of configuration and location, right? So that was the first level question, and I think after that we came with a really defined view on, okay, well that's what's next. The next thing then is, okay, now that we've kind of figured out the system configuration, we want to be robust against certain things. We need to be robust against lighting, because as you drive, the lighting changes. There's some temporal fluctuations, right? The temporal stability there. So we did a lighting experiment in which we kind of varied the lighting in various intense ways, in conjunction with pose and gaze as well. And obviously things that you mentioned, glasses, being able to change lens qualities, and having confounds that are introduced, whether it's hands or masks or other things within the scene. And then we're continue to iterate. Our teams are continue to even further explore and further refine and drive this data. And that's only possible when you have this data in the loop kind of generation process.
Absolutely. So we just wrapped up, not wrapped up, we just kicked off, I guess, a project at Affectiva where we, the use case or the feature is to be able to detect animals in a car, so that if you forget the animal behind, the car can kind of, flag that to you, the driver or the occupant. And so again, to collect this data, we partnered with dog organization, animal shelter organizations, and we had them come in with all sorts of dogs, and we had the dogs be in the vehicle and do all sorts of things, and we kind of started that data collection. And our team was presenting this yesterday, and there were all sorts of questions around dog bites, right? So do you just focus on human faces, or do you do other types of, do you do animals, and do you also foresee doing objects and,
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're creating a generalized platform, right, for synthetic data, right? So if you look ahead to where we're headed, we're going to be having dozens of APIs within our system that put people in various contexts. So, there's an initial focus of ours, but then objects and animals and different environments and different camera modules and different camera modalities. So you kind of build out and layer these APIs over time to, bite off a much larger chunk of capability around computer vision. And there's a number of other techniques that are more adaptive and things that we're working on in the background as well. But 100% in the future, it's inevitable that simulation and synthetic data will be used to train computer vision systems, right? Yeah. And our paradigm there is just like every other engineering discipline. There's CAD software, there's simulation software, there's signal processing software that's used, right, to inform these things, and that the same paradigm will come to computer vision in the future.
Yeah, that is fascinating. So a couple more questions on that thread. So far, we've been using this data to train our models. When we are pitching and kind of working with our automotive companies, I don't think the car companies are at a point where the data, where there's agreement that you can use the data to validate the models, right? So do you have a sense of how close we are to being able to use synthetic data to actually okay models to go to market?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, synthetic data is still early; it's new, right? And I think there's great research coming out showing how to use synthetic data alongside real data. The various domain adaptation techniques, refinement techniques that are starting to get kind of acceptance in the space. But it'll take a little bit longer for, I would say, the larger companies that are not early tech adopters or kind of leaders in AI to really grasp this. But if you look at those companies that are the leading AI companies like yourselves or others like in the Valley here, they use synthetic data routinely, right? In production to create some of these systems. And they've number of interesting papers that demonstrate that you're actually able to build better models using synthetic data, right? Because there's better distributions that you can capture that are hard to capture in real world, or you can provide labels that you can't obtain through humans, right? So there's a lot of, I think, advantages over time, and that will become more evident. And it's our responsibility and others in the space to put out the papers, write the books, as we are trying to do and have done, to kind of educate the space. And then ultimately, to your point, you have to have the real world validation of these approaches. And that'll take time to generate, but we're getting there. Definitely.
Yeah. I also think there's a very interesting question on what percentage of your data is synthetic versus like for us, this is something that we're exploring internally, right? Like, is your data the majority of our training data, or is it like 50-50 or, 30-80, 30-70, et cetera? So kind of figuring out, the mix of synthetic versus real data is still kind of
it's highly model specific, highly kind of performance driven in terms of what you're trying to achieve, and obviously depending on how much data you have in house already, right? So it's not going to be the perfect solution for everything, right? Yeah. Especially at this stage, but there are obviously a lot of areas where it can kind of definitely drive performance. And again, I think the key is iteration. Yeah. Right. If you have a model endpoint in mind, you can iterate on a daily basis with synthetic data, right? 100,000 images every night, you can get it in the morning and train into a model. And that, and I think those adaptive generation approaches, are going to continue to improve, and these closed loop systems that just like hyperparameter tuning or neural network search and all these other things that have improved and streamlined the process of building models, similar approaches by analogy, will be applied to kind of data as well to kind of drive performance.
Yeah. So are we able to mitigate algorithmic bias for, say, historically underrepresented racial and ethnic groups or gender identities using synthesis?
One of our kind of ethical kind of foundational points of our company is to make sure we build more ethical AI, right? More fair AI. And by having declarative data distributions, you can ensure by design that your data class is balanced, right? So when you're generating data with Synthesis AI, you're actually telling us via the API exactly the type of data you need. So I need equal representation across gender, ethnicity, age, BMI, all the different kind of parameters that we surface. So in that regard, you can build by design much more equal data, right? And in addition to, I think the kind of bias issue that you brought up, which is very, very important. I think for a lot of human-based systems, privacy is also hugely important, right? We've seen lots of kind of recent examples of large tech companies not necessarily being mindful of underlying consumer privacy, right? And as we live more of our lives online through teleconferencing, and we have smart systems in our homes, through the next generation of smart assistants and smart home products, privacy has to be essential to how those systems are built, and another advantage of synthetic data. And finally, our last kind of ethical kind of foundational point to kind of extend this response a little bit is around democratization of AI. I think right now it's been very much controlled by large companies who've been able to amass these data moats, right? But if you can generate data on demand, that really changes who can compete and win for building such systems.
I love that. I hadn't thought about that, but absolutely, it lowers the barrier to entry for AI companies if you can get access to, valid data at scale, which has been a barrier to entry. Absolutely. What about data integrity in these categories? How do you think about data integrity?
So I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by data integrity. But I think, again, privacy, if it's from that perspective, we fully maintain those is very synthetic. And since it's generated, we have pixel perfect information around the annotations that we're providing.
Yeah. Is synthetic data also labeled? And what about unlabeled and unsupervised data? This is interesting because a big part of our data expense, right? There's the acquisition expense, but then there's the annotation expense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great question. I mean, obviously one of the fundamental things we're trying to solve with synthetic data is the access to labeled data, right? Again, since it's generated, we know everything about the scene, right? So we can extend, lots of different labels for free. And I think whether it's, traditional labels, let's take facial information. So we output segmentation maps. So left eyebrow, right eyebrow, pupil, very, very fine grained sub-segmentation, 3D landmarks, both of obstructed landmarks and kind of contours, right? But standard things, again, in 3D, which is great. Depth maps, surface normals. And so all of that comes for free within kind of the way we generate the data. Now, with respect to unsupervised approaches, I mean, that's a really interesting space, right? I think as we move toward being able to move away from annotation and build these systems in that regard, I think that's going to be a complementary approach. Now, the way you have to think about that, I think, think about things comprehensively is what is the cost per performance that trade-off, right? Yeah. So these unsupervised ones are great if you can spend millions of dollars on training your systems and having the large systems, but that's not accessible to everybody, right? And then there's still going to be this complementary role of synthetic data to do virtual prototyping, like the example we gave. How do you answer the question of where to put the camera in the car, or how do you answer the question of how to best use various modalities of imaging? How do you combine time of flight with near infrared with RGB,
right? For
instance, right? And you can't always do that. You can't do that. There's no way to do that with just acquiring data, right? So it's all very complementary, and these are all, I think, things that will ultimately drive computer vision forward in the future.
That is actually very interesting because obviously in the automotive space, we do both RGB. We use RGB optical sensors, but also near infrared by definition, because if you're detecting, drowsy behavior, you have to be able to do that with different lighting conditions, including at night. So are you able to generate different types of optical?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done near infrared with you guys directly, time of flight with some other folks. We work with a lot of the major handset manufacturers, major technology companies, and it's very clear, right? I think if you look at the technology trends, that multimodal imaging will be in every device, right? So I can't speak to the exact engagements, but there are a number of chip manufacturers and technology companies building very complex multimodal sensor modalities. And we've seen some of these already in consumer devices, in phones, right? For instance, out there. And that thing, it amplifies the role of synthetic data because these other data streams are impossible to label.
Yeah.
Right. For individuals.
Yeah, exactly. Can you comment on the business model? Like, so say somebody signs up to your API, how do you charge?
Yeah, we charge very simply on a usage model, right? Okay. And the way we're pricing things today is, order of magnitude or two cheaper than traditional approaches, right? Because it's just a totally different paradigm, right? So if you go to scale.ai today and try to get, facial landmark data for, high density landmarks, it'll cost you $5, $6, $7 an image to do this, right? We generate images, it costs you 30 cents and you get all that information plus all the other channels available for you, right? So it's a very different paradigm, and we just want to amplify that and make it as easy as people to generate data, consume it, iterate. Again, we just want people to get into this different paradigm mode of just being able to experiment and try things and iterate.
Can we synthetically generate time series data?
Yeah, so we focus on computer vision today. So if you mean, temporal video, yeah, of course, absolutely you can, yeah. It gets a little bit more nuanced, of course, when you start to deal with motion of human beings, behavior of human beings. These are things that we're working on. There's various techniques to inform that, imitation learning, all types of interesting things we're doing in the background of how to create realistic, behaviorally accurate, photorealistic human agents, right? So that's a long-term roadmap for us, and it gets more interesting. But today, if you did want to, for instance, in an in-car situation, have dynamic motion or the light changing that could simulate driving simulations, you can do that today.
But can you simulate? So, for example, I'll take drowsiness, right? There are at least four levels of drowsiness that we are trying to build classifiers for. Can you actually generate a video of a synthetic person? They're awake, but over the course of, like a few minutes, you can see them temporally progress into like an extreme drowsy state.
Yeah. So for emotions, it's really interesting. You guys are the experts in that space. So, but emotions really interesting, right? Because I think some of the labels are fairly nebulous, right? In terms of how you classify things. So our approach there has been to provide really fine-grained control over facial features. Right. So through our API today, you have 150 different controls in various degrees. So you can say left eye open, right eye closed, like you can do all types of variations. And I think it comes down to mapping that into potential emotional states that you're willing to do. And then, of course, you can bookend those and have, things interpolated across that or randomized in various ways. And we've had those conversations internally ourselves.
Right. And I think a lot of that is on the roadmap for our future collaboration, right?
Absolutely.
Like start simulating some of these more complex state.
Absolutely. And there are techniques from the visual effects space that we will leverage as well, right? I mean, we've seen movies, we've seen very accurate facial capture, right? But the key is how do you create a huge library of diverse sets of emotions that can be mapped into these models. So there's a number of things that we're considering there for how that gets built out. And then once you have it, then you can apply it across models. You can obviously manipulate the environments and create a lot of diversity.
Very cool.
It's in a very exciting space.
Yeah, super cool. When creating synthetic data of people, do you typically start with reference images or videos of a real individual and then you manipulate properties of it? Or the individual is created from scratch in the 3D modeling tool?
Yeah, it's a great question. It comes down to how do we build the underlying assets and what informs those assets? How do we know that our human models are realistic and kind of capture the diversity of humans? So we have, there's some of that is proprietary, so I can't speak to all of it, but the general process in visual effects, and then I'll kind of map it into what we do. The general process in visual effects is you bring people in and you do high resolution 2D scans, and then you create 3D models, right? So part of our process is actually doing that to ensure we capture variability around skin types, textures, obviously geometry. The other side of it is humans have certain structures, right? And it's a well-known science around the structure of the face and, kind of these different kind of anatomical elements you can, the muscle structure underneath, right, for instance, and things like that. So we also then bring in that type of expertise and layer it on top of these models. And then we have a way of expanding those models using generative approaches that capture certain correlations between features and things that are relevant for females and males and other things, right? But of course, you can randomize those things as well. I think one of the powers of synthetic data is that you can also not only capture a proper distribution of real world data, but you can extend beyond it, right? As well. And oftentimes what they call domain randomization becomes a powerful tool to build more robust models.
So it's inspired by real humans, or based on initially based on real humans, but also codifying some of the for the face, the facial muscles, and you're not going to generate a face that has one eye and the mouth here, right? Like it's
that's correct. Yeah, I mean, there's 3D parametric models coupled with generative 3D approaches that we leverage here.
Can synthetic data at some point bridge the gap for the areas where no real data is available or lacking?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things we're doing today, right? So I think oftentimes it's very hard because of the combinatorics we talked about to capture the full breadth of data, right? For this particular individual, I need, to your point, different glasses. What happens if they start wearing masks? And that's actually was an interesting, a use case for us. Lots of companies have data, but didn't have data with masks. Now you have to go acquire it. Well, in a 3D world, you can throw a mask on these individuals and that you have in your base and start training and making sure your systems are robust. So I think one of the values of synthetic data is that you can actually create these distributions that go beyond what you potentially have available. And of course, we talked about additional data channels, right? That haven't been leveraged or labeled in the real world, right? So you have to use these alternative approaches.
Do you actually think there will be a time where we won't need to collect any real data at all?
Well, I think a good paradigm for this is, I brought up the Wright brothers example. That's kind of a nice thing that we talk about internally sometimes is how are planes built today? Yeah. Right? You have a very sophisticated set of simulations that you can run to understand structural integrity, mechanical, design, engine performance, electrical, design and performance. There's just all these things that were built over time, obviously, hundreds of man years, thousands of man years spent kind of building these elements. But we're at a place that you can understand a system pretty well before you build something and start flying this giant thing around in the air, right? Could that exist for for computer vision? Absolutely. Absolutely. It exists in every other engineering discipline. So I think we will get to a point that we'll have the fidelity of these simulations and the kind of the understanding of some of these kind of core elements that we'll be able to do a lot synthetically. And that opens up a whole bunch of new interesting spaces, right? Because then you can now start doing, you have agents interacting with another. You have behavioral things you can map into them, and you use reinforcement learning. And there's lots of people doing some interesting things in that space. Like, what can you train when you have virtual environments and people starting to interact with one another? And what can you teach the AI around it?
Totally. Do you kind of have different definitions for simulation versus synthesis? Do you see them as two different universes?
No, not really. I think it's just a bit of semantics. But I think ultimately what you're trying to do is capture real world phenomena in digital form, right? I think that's kind of ultimately where you're going with this. And, other companies are focused on other types of data, right? That is relevant, right? So we focus on computer vision. People are doing speech synthesis, they're doing text, they're doing time series, tabular data, right? So I think eventually all these things will get to a level of a more higher fidelity simulation.
That is actually very interesting because we also, in the kind of the human perception AI world, we think multimodally too. Mm-hmm. We got our start in computer vision. We've invested a little bit in vocal analytics. And ultimately, I see all these different modalities coming together. It sounds like you're focused on computer vision. You're not doing anything in the other modalities.
Right now, we're 100% on computer vision. And I think the reason to start in computer vision is because you can borrow so heavily from the CGI visual effects world, right? I mean, there's so many great tools that have been built there that you can leverage really, really in interesting ways.
Yeah, very cool. So tell us more about some of the other applications or industries where, where you're seeing interest in synthetic data.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, synthetic data, I think, will ultimately go across a lot of sectors, right? We're focused on people and context as kind of our organizing theme, starting with faces first. So our facial clients, emotion sensing, obviously, the work we're doing with you guys. We work with handset manufacturers, so facial verification systems, computational photography. When you take a picture with a phone, there's a lot going on in the AI in terms of segmenting images and relighting them and adding things. So you need great high quality data for that. Teleconferencing has been an area of focus for us. Obviously, we spend a lot more of our time on these systems.
And what's the use case?
There's simple things like you want a virtual background and you want it to look good, right? That's a very simple use case, and we've all used these various approaches, and they don't always work, and funny things happen. So that's a simple use case. To much more sophisticated use cases in which you want to say you have low bandwidth and you want a really high quality image on the other side. well, how can you then resample the image, segment out the face, provide, AI enabled, resampling or, high, re-resolution kind of approaches on the other side to relight the image and, provide higher levels of quality across a low bandwidth link. That's an interesting area. It requires a lot of interesting synthetic data to kind of model that and test things and do stuff. And then emotion sensing. I think there's a lot of use around understanding attention, simple things like gaze. Are you paying attention to this? But I think more advanced things, when you look at telemedicine, for instance, and you're having a Q&A with the doctor, what kind of overlays can you provide for a doctor to tell you about evoked emotional response, especially in things like mental health and other places. So there's a lot of really,
I love that.
Really key, interesting things in that area. And then a couple other use cases would be smart assistants. So the next generation of, the Amazon Alexas of the world will all have video cameras and try to understand the context of the agents in the space and what they're doing. And that requires some, interesting approaches that are highly privacy compliant, right? Because you're looking at people in their homes and, you want to build those systems in the right way.
Very exciting. Very, very exciting. And a lot of it's kind of interesting because we know that our technology is applicable across industries. And it's interesting that also, obviously your products and suite of products are very applicable across industries as well. Do you have to struggle with that? Like, have you had the conversation, are we a platform company or do we need to verticalize and focus on specific use cases?
Yeah, I mean, you can't boil the ocean. I think, maybe it's too grandiose of an analogy, but, we're like, we face this to us for like books for Amazon when they first started, right? I think our philosophy is, to have 100% solution for a particular set of customers.
Yeah.
Right. So focusing and going deep in one set of verticals. And of course, there's strategic reasons to focus in people and because of business and because of technical reasons, but also because of ethical reasons. I think these things overlap within that domain. So that was the right place for us to start. But there are, lots of places this could go, right? So our approach has been build a horizontal platform that can scale, but then build a 100% solution in one vertical and then stage the APIs over time to kind of bite off more and more complexity and obviously adding environments and more complex human natures and things will allow you to do stuff. And maybe one previous comment on your point around humans and emotion sensing. If you look at any imagination of the future, it's always a person in an AI system interacting. Right. So of course, these systems are going to have to get more sophisticated. And of course, there's going to be a person in whatever you're doing with respect to camera and video-based systems, right? And that's another reason to focus in the area, get it right, and hopefully will service us for many, many years to come as we build these more interesting systems.
All right. So starting to wrap up here, we have a lot of people listening into this, and I think the space of synthetic data and simulation is super exciting. What's your advice to folks who are curious about this space, maybe want to consider a career in this area? What would your advice be?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of good research coming out. We try to collect a lot of that in our review article and our book that are coming out. So, start there. I think there's just great academic work happening across the board, number of companies in the space. And for me, it's, I love that there's other companies doing this work because we need to all collectively validate the approach and kind of build a solution that kind of services things. So I think there's going to be additional proof points coming out from us, from other people in the space, and collectively, I think we'll drive this forward. Now, there are a couple of, I think, technical things that people can do, right? Because you do have to understand, especially in computer vision, if that's the focus of synthetic data, you have to understand the tools that exist beyond AI, right? So you have a lot of these folks maybe come from the generative AI space or machine learning. There's a number of really cool things happening on the procedural generation side, 3D parametric models, CG, gaming, so you bringing those tool sets together oftentimes leads to really interesting approaches. And I think what we're seeing is both spaces are going to get disrupted by one another, right? So visual effects and those types of things obviously are going to be driving synthetic data for AI, but now AI is starting to really infiltrate visual effects, and people are building full, kind of really sophisticated visual effects using AI, right? And of course, there's deep fakes and things like that kind of map across the board on those approaches. But it's going to be disruptive, and you kind of have to understand the trends on both sides and the technologies on both sides.
Very exciting. I believe that innovation happens at the intersection of disciplines. And so you're bringing the CGI world with the machine learning and AI world and kind of.
Oh, yeah. And literally when we put the people next to each other in a room, all right, there's always like, wow, you could do that. Oh, wow, you could do that. And they're like looking at each other's screens around what's possible. And then it's in AI in general, this happens in every engineering space. Like you kind of innovate within your bubble, right? So everyone's trying to use GANs to do everything.
Right.
Well, if you have a 3D model that has, you have perfect information about it and you can manipulate it in a pixel level way using these other pipelines, that's a much more efficient, much better approach to getting to your endpoint, and you can complement it, right? So there's I think you have to understand both sides, and that only comes by sitting next to someone that knows the space.
Yeah, very cool. All right, last question. So you've obviously just raised a new round of funding, your Series A round. Very exciting. Congratulations again. And actually, one of your investors, Rob May, is the person who put us initially in touch with each other. So maybe a few comments on how that was, raising a round of funding. Who are the investors who actually understand synthetic data and are excited about it? And what's next for you guys?
Yeah, first of all, shout out to Rob. Rob is a great kind of advocate and supporter. So anyone out there looking to raise a fund, go to PJC, talk to Rob. He's a great guy to have on board. But also, he was an early in the synthetic data space. He's been thinking about it and written about it. And I think that's always great, right? You want to connect with an investor who shares your kind of your vision for where things are going, or sees the thesis unfolding in front of them. And as I mentioned, beyond the financial endpoints, the ethical endpoints and things that you're kind of also driving toward, right? I think that's really, really important. Now, for
did you find that there were investors who actually cared about the diversity and the
absolutely, and that's one of our filters. That was one of our filters, right? I mean, and you have, because this is a journey, right, to get to where we want to get to, how we want to build this, and we want to build it in the right way, right? And that sometimes may mean making trade-offs. Oh, there's a particular use case that's maybe not ethical, right? Surveillance, right? Or, things that people may have, and there's a lot of money and people want you to do it, but you have to be able to say no. And you need investors and partners that can support you in that, because it doesn't align with the ethics of the company and what you're trying to build, right? So that's very important. And I think you have to filter for that. You have to work with people you like and people that align with your values, right? So that's been good. In terms of raising in general, in terms of COVID, I don't think it's really changed much. I think for us specifically, it's been an accelerant, I think, because you have the inability to go out in the real world and collect data, the inability to have people sitting in a room and labeling data or collecting data. So you have to think outside the box, right? And that's kind of driven a number of conversations for us, even from large companies that have very large established processes for collecting data. They just have to think differently now. It's just
have to pivot.
Have to pivot. So that's been good. And I think from a investor standpoint, I think this year we've seen a very different perception of synthetic data. And this always happens, right? Things are on the fringe. They're maybe early. They're not quite validated in a lot of ways, and eventually it starts moving into more mainstream and you get a lot more attention. And I think synthetic data is getting there. It's not there yet, but and I think the next year or so, I think people will realize that it actually is fairly disruptive. And like all disruptive technologies, it all starts kind of working. And then and next thing you know, it's the only thing that people use. So we're kind of, I think, getting to that inflection point.
That's awesome. I had so much fun having this conversation. Yashar, I feel very fortunate and grateful to be partnering with you on this journey. And I can't wait to see what we do next together.
Yeah, likewise. You and your team have been tremendous. And one of the things I think that maybe doesn't come across, right, when we have these conversations is you guys, and that is just a compliment for you and your organization, you guys talk about empathy, but everybody in your company is super nice, empathetic, and easy to work with across the board, right? And I think that's a real core cultural element that I think ultimately will drive into your products and things that you do. So kudos to that, and appreciate you having me here.
Thank you. That's kudos to the Affectiva team. One of our core values is human connection, and I think it's true. It's not just kind of on our website. We really partner with people openly and collaboratively, and it's fun, right? It's fun to be.
I definitely vouch for that. You guys are great.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again. Everybody stay well and stay safe and connected. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
I don't know about you, but as a non-technical person, I was really able to follow Rana and Yashar's conversation, and their enthusiasm for the technology and the promised synthetic data was fascinating to listen to, especially the pieces to where it would be helpful to get data around various in-cabin conditions for our automotive data collection efforts, such as different camera angles and various lighting conditions within a vehicle. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe to Affectiva's Human-Centric AI podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts for new episodes. We are also on social media, so please reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Affectiva to share any feedback you have on the show and weigh in on the discussion using hashtag AffectivaAsks. Don't forget to rate us and comment with your feedback to help make the podcast more discoverable for others. Until next time, thanks for listening.